Hi, I'm Reef Quail. I'm Managing Director of NRF Retail's Big Show Asia Pacific, and this is 5 Things Friday APAC edition.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey everyone,
Good to be
happy
back.
New
We're back.
Year.
It feels like it was
just really
forever
rude.
since New York a whole time ago. It was only 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's only been 6 weeks.
I'm going to China tomorrow. I'm like,
Oh, fantastic. How are you both?
We're good. We're good. I'm excited to talk about what I want to share today.
Yeah, Yuen, so listen, let's just get straight into it. Yuen, why don't we start with you?
Okay, I want to talk about the Lunar New Year, Chinese New Year dilemma, paradox for retailers. You know how retailers we're always deciding on what we're buying for Lunar New Year like months ahead. We put in our orders very early on, but trends and customers decide only weeks before. So one very clear conversation that we keep still having is about the Mandarin orange trends. If you pull up this picture that I kept taking and I'm like rolling my eyes at all the time, is that the trends for Mandarin orange is only clear like after it's too late. So we buy way earlier, decisions are locked in, orders are placed months ahead. We look at grades, we look at origin, we look at forecasted demand, we look at all last year's consumer preference. And then closer to Chinese New Year, like right now, mostly through social chatter. And then they will talk about attributes like sweetness, thin skin versus thick skin, low seeds or no seeds. Is it easier to peel? What are the freshness like? What is the gift worthy appearance? So this gap really is how retailer is not noticing the pattern recognition, right? We're not winning it, reading the attributes. We're not looking at how repeated praise, repeated complaints. We're not looking at how customers are sending us clear demand patterns, but we are really not being a lot more productive in terms of how we are buying. So I think this needs to change somewhere along the line. We need to really think about how we are looking at what is on the shelf stories, how we're rebundling, for example, very quickly. How are we? It's tiring during the Chinese New Year season. You know, the amount of replenishment we have to make just on Mandarin oranges is crazy. But if the customer's not biting, then that is a business problem already. So this is something that data needs to solve.
How are you listing it? What are you listing for? How are you doing that listing?
So we have to buy all this way earlier, right? So that means we really can't change the way we are looking at oranges, especially when it's fresh produce that comes in like weeks ahead. So that's really something that the whole world in terms of value chain needs to reconsider and need to rethink how we are selling as more and more people can buy direct from e-commerce. So how is the physical store going to fight is a big question.
Okay, I understand. Awesome.
Interesting. Reef, why don't we move to you next?
Cool. So mine's not about Chinese New Year, but it's still about China and Japan for that matter. So one of the things that struck me in the media in the last few days is IKEA's change of strategy. So the IKEA are not withdrawing from Japan and China, but they're closing stores. So they're also reopening stores, but they're closing a lot of stores. So in China, IKEA closed something like 7 major stores.
Wow.
And these are, large format stores
The big
in major cities and secondary cities. So places like Nantong and Harbin, but they're really shifting. What we're seeing is obviously we're seeing weak consumer demand in China. It's a sluggish market at the moment, and so slower home furnishing buying and that type of thing. But what we're finding is that IKEA is repositioning. So they're actually opening smaller urban focused stores in places like Beijing and Shenzhen over the next 2 years. So they're really focusing on that digital omnichannel piece, which is something that's not what's super strong in China. China is a really digital format place. It's less so around the omni. In Japan, it's the opposite. So in Shinjuku, for example, and Harajuku, they've closed 2 city formats, so the smaller format, but then they're doubling down. So in Shibuya, their main flagship, they're investing in that, and they're actually opening a larger store around the region. So 2 markets side by side, but opposite strategies. Really, for China, they're not abandoning the market. They're pulling back from large underperforming stores and recalibrating towards smaller urban stores and digital sales. Whereas in Japan, they're not exiting either, but they're seeing they want fewer and more effective touch points, so more larger stores. So that's amazing that within China and Japan we have two really disparate strategies for retail for IKEA. They're certainly not withdrawing, but they're completely calibrating for the market.
I mean, my assumption would be one, costing. And I think you know how it is more expensive in Shizuoka, for example, and how actually the way Japanese shop, really they don't mind large format that much, especially if it's in a neighborhood space versus China that is very driven on e-commerce. So just show them what's necessary, then they will just do it online, right? And then so they don't need so big pace. Yeah,
absolutely.
that's how I'm looking at it.
And I think you're right. I think it's the China play is very much an omni play. It's a digital and physical store.
Yuen, why don't we come back to you for your second one?
So I want to talk a little bit about my wrap of NRF New York. And I think everywhere you turn in NRF New York, you only see this word, agent, agentic, you know. So I guess the takeaway really is retailer really need to think about if you're invisible to the agents and you really are invisible to the customers. Now, it is looking like the way I'm seeing how NRF positioning is as if like agents is the new front door of shopping. iAgents is going to interpret the intent of the customers. They're going to compare options for the customers, and then they will trigger actions, you know, whether it's putting in the cart or ordering it, or tell me when you want this to be ordered when the price hits this, etc., etc. But then at the same time, I think earlier this month or late last month, and then there is this huge conversation about Malt Book. You know how this social media platform that is created for agents, where all the agents come together and talk about and aren't allowed in the space. I think a lot of really strange conversation in the corridors are like, you see, that's why we cannot even do agents. It's really dangerous. We don't know what they're up to. And what if our information gets exchanged? And I'm like, please understand what Malt Book really is and what the conversation amongst agents. It's interesting, but that is not the most risky factor of not deploying agents or not understanding what agents can do for your business, because that's how consumers' behavior is going to move towards too. And then if you're not fixing what fundamentally needs to be fixed at the retailer's end, you're first going to be completely left behind this conversation. And second, you can't even find your way through much later when everyone is already on it. So yeah, I remember Riff talking about how in June last year, we were talking about AI. And then when we finished the NRF APAC conversation, it was all agents, like almost weeks, it became agents. It was AI and then it became agents, right? And now it's agents.
I felt like we missed it. Like the whole thing, we talked about generative AI the whole time. And then all of a sudden, 4 weeks later, the whole conversation just shifted.
Yeah, just like that. And so it's also the same thing, the same conversation about how I felt, right? Like we were talking about agents all the time. And then now as I walk down the corridor of my fellow retailers, and they were all like, did you read about Malt Book? You know, did you understand that, you know, agents don't need human anymore? We can't get that. We have to stop it. Stop.
Can't stop that.
You know, you're completely not getting the right story.
Moving on back to you, Reef, I think. Or me.
Right. So I'm going back to my passion points. Long time ago, I used to work in advertising, and one of my favorite categories was sportswear. I worked on Nike, I worked on Adidas for the Rugby World Cup. I've worked on Puma as well. And what we've seen, something happen that's been transformational, I think, in the category. So Anta in China, for example, are two big sportswear brands. Li Ning, named after the Olympian, his own brand. And then the other one is Anta Sport. So these are the Chinese homegrown brands, okay? Now, Anta have just bought almost 30% of Puma.
Wow.
Right? So Puma is an iconic brand. They already own Fila, for example, but Puma is a big one. So in terms of this, what does it mean? It means that this breaks a century of Eurocentric Chinese, of Eurocentric sportswear in the category. It means that they are the largest single shareholder in Puma.
Wow.
They'll take a board seat. They don't, from what they've signaled in media and their releases, they haven't signaled they're going to buy the whole lot, but Puma has been underperforming. But this is an opportunity to recapitalize a brand that's been struggling and put in some Chinese capital and some operational muscle that can outplay both the international brands like Adidas and Nike, but also play tough at home.
Yeah.
Because obviously China is a big market. It's early, but it's early to say what for me, it's a statement. And right now, I think that we should be watching Nike and Adidas's stock because this is a global shift, and it could accelerate the shift in the sportswear brand. We could see Puma reinventing itself, and in our backyard for Asia Pacific, this is something that you put that operational grunt and sourcing behind it from a Chinese perspective, and this could be another level, another leg in terms of product.
I love it. I think, the sports fashion apparel brands have been on trend for a while, and if you've not been crushing it while you've been like one of the key drivers of growth, it's interesting. And also, it gives Puma fantastic access to the APAC market, right? And that's where growth is, rather than in Europe. Okay, cool. So I'll close off. I was at shop. Obviously, I had so much fun at NRF. I came back and went to Abu Dhabi to go to Shop Talk Lux, which this was its first.
How was it?
It was really good. So I should have put some pictures of Shop Talk Lux, but it was at the Emirates Palace in Abu Dhabi on the beach. So in my mind, it's a very iconic type environment where you're listening to talks as the sun is setting on the beach, and it's beautiful weather in the winter, in our winter. So I thought it was a fantastic place. I thought it did really well. They had a diverse group of speakers from all of the major fashion houses or maisons. They had Vera Wang doing the keynote, and that was fantastic. But the one thing that no one really talked about, and I guess who would talk about it, was the problem that I see about, everyone mentioned that luxury has been having a bad time over the last couple of years, and it's been declining. And specifically in Europe, the powerhouses that we've got over here, they've been declining. But no one really sort of said the quiet bit out loud, which in my mind, this is, it's an uncomfortable truth. But ultimately, the product itself, thanks to TikTok, thanks to social media, leather bags are being dissected by influencers, and they're talking about the leathers. They're talking about what part of the animal did it come from? How much did it cost to make? And consumers are no longer, especially this new generation, they're no longer just going to be sold to from a marketing perspective. Authenticity of product means that quality or value that you're saying actually has to be there. And that's not to say that Chinese products are not at that caliber, because 100% they are. The craftsmanship and everything else is there, but you can't sort of ship it to Europe just to stick a label on to then charge a little bit more. And I think that's what consumers are waking up to. And I think it would have been good that, in my mind, would have been the guidance that I would have had as a talk. Talk about the product. What are you doing from a product perspective?
And I would say in that instance, it links nicely back to what you were saying. Luxury brands have lost the rational narrative around their product. And what I mean by that is, you're just saying the consumer's dissecting the leather, the bag or whatever, right? Because the brands aren't putting this conversation in market. And you know what? These consumers who are discovering and making these discoveries, other people's content, which is not the brands, are doing it through agents. Because the agents have gone, in the absence of content, we'll take the best available. And guess what? It's not by, one of the luxury maisons. It's actually by the influencer who has been backed into being able to buy one of these expensive handbags, pull it apart, and reveal the secret, the dirty little secret of luxury brands. And it makes it that all of a sudden those rational features. And that's how the agents are learning in that environment because of the absence of content that's been rational content that's been put out by the brands.
Because we're not talking about it is definitely a problem.
I think it's just, it's putting your head in the sand and saying someone's going to sort it out. It won't be us. We've got
the agents are sorting it out now.
I think it'll be the great equalizer. And I met some wonderful, and I've met the other people that I met there. I met a lot of APAC startup brands. Like there was an Australian sock company who make hygienic, like with alternative material socks. They were on your Australian Shark Tank. So I'm going to bring them onto the show. So I did meet a lot of young brands who are aspirational. Their pricing is aspirational. They're not luxury yet, but that was nice to see as well in terms of APAC brands flying across to do that whole sort of, because Shop Talk's quite famous for its table talks. That was So it was nice.
And it would have been with the combination of the hosted buyer and a beautiful destination. I can see why it would be compelling.
Yeah. So anyway, that's it. Our first show of it is our first show of the year, right?
Yeah, we've been, we have been pretty
Okay, listen, we're back into the swing of things. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you both next week.
See you again
sir.
soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.